Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for this evening. Just before I start sharing the PowerPoint, two quick introductions. First of all, the office where I'm sitting, the Strauss Amiel office, I actually have two computer screens, which means that I can see everybody who's in the meeting on one screen, which is always useful, and I can see the PowerPoint on the second screen. So if every so often I go like that, it's just to make sure that I'm actually showing what I want to be showing. So please don't be offended that I turn away from you. Secondly, this evening isn't just for me to speak. The idea is for me to share some of my ideas and for you to share yours. And if you have things that you do at your Seder and you would like to share with other people, feel free to interrupt at any time. Just unmute yourselves, or you can send a message in the chat, whatever works for you. I will try and give everybody the chance to speak as well. Okay. So there we have it. The Corona Seder. And the reason it's called the Corona Seder is because in Israel, that's what we call it, as opposed to COVID-19. Here it goes by the name of Corona, which is great if you're a beer drinker and you know the Corona Lager, because it meant that for the first 6 months of this pandemic, everyone spoke about the beer. Since then, I believe they've actually gone out of operation, or they're certainly close to it, because people, for whatever reason, didn't want to drink it. But it's definitely different. So last year when we came into the Seder, it was still fresh and everything was new. We didn't quite know what to do with quarantines and with lockdowns and being able to host and not being able to host. And there were questions that here at work we were getting from all over the world. There were questions about, can you have Seder on Zoom or not? I'm certainly not going to get into that question. But there are things that you can do, even if you're distant from the people who you'd normally have, or friends and family that you would want to have. And I'd like to share some of those ideas with you this evening.
Here. I'm not listening. Okay.
Okay. Before we do that, what exactly is the Seder all about? Why do we have the Seder? That's an open question. And please don't say because the rabbi said so.
It's the mitzvah in the Torah.
To have a Seder?
To tell the story.
Okay.
Order.
So you tell a story, great. You need the whole Seder just for that. So why else?
Got to tell the bincha, same thing.
It's the same idea. It's to pass the message on. Okay. So I broke it down into three reasons, or three main reasons. The first one is experience. Right? The idea is to experience the leaving of Egypt. The second one is learning, is education. It's also related to what was just said. And the third one is to be together. Right? So Purim that we've just celebrated is very much a communal festival. Pesach, however, is a family festival. Right? And just to prove that I'm not making it up, we'll go through a couple of quick sources. So the first one is the Rambam. Rambam says, "Bechol dor v'dor, in every generation, chayav adam leharot et atzmo." A person is obligated to show himself, to present himself as if he has just now left Egypt, which is a difficult thing to do because, well, the vast majority of the people here, I assume, have never been to Egypt. So how do you show yourself? How do you present yourself? How do you relive the experience? So one of the ways you do it is through the Seder. And seeing as I was asked, why on earth am I wearing a hat in the office at night? That's the reason. because somebody with my skin color and my hair color, when he's just being told, yeah, you're going to be leaving Egypt, you're going to walk across a desert. It's going to take a couple of months to get from where you are now to the promised land. There is absolutely no chance that I would go out without a hat. Therefore, at my Seder, I wear a hat. Okay? And if you want, you don't have to wear this sort of a hat. You can wear one of the baseball caps that I have behind me, or if you're really adventurous, you can wear one of these. Okay? We'll come back to the frog hat in a moment. Yeah. It's a frog hat. Bought in the duty-free shop in Cancun. We'll get back to that a bit later. Okay, so that's the experience. Okay, there you go. The Torah talks about when the Jews were getting ready to leave Egypt, right, that they should be sitting down for the very first Seder, right? Na'alechem b'raglechem, you should have your shoes on, makilchem b'yedchem, your walking staff in your hand, right? Motnechim chagurim, your loins girded, and just be ready to walk out. So when we get to the Seder, do the same thing. Come ready as if you're about to go on a journey. So every so often, I don't do it every year, but every so often I'll actually wear sandals to the Seder, as opposed to a nice pair of my Shabbat shoes, because, well, they didn't have leather shoes from Clark's. They would have had sandals. So great, wear sandals. The learning. We say it in the Haggadah, Afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevonim, even if we're all wise, we all have understanding, we can learn from what, the sources that we have in front of us. We still have an obligation to learn. And we have an obligation to retell the story and to discuss it, right? But mitzvah aleinu lesaper b'yitziat mitzrayim. It's not just to read the psukim, we actually have to talk about it. We have to discuss it. We have to understand it, right? The best way to teach is to experience. The next best way to know something is to try and teach it. So when we're passing the message on to our children, to our family, to our friends, well, we need to know what's in front of us. We need to understand the story, which means not only do we sit there on the night and discuss it, it also means we have to work beforehand. We have to do homework. We'll get back to the homework shortly. That's just a nice picture. You don't actually have to sit on a pile of books. In fact, I can see my father-in-law's screen here. Please, in his name, don't sit on a pile of books. He'll be very upset with the mere thought that I suggested. And this notion of togetherness. So when we talk about the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people, right? HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. This month for you should be the first month. That's at the beginning of a section that talks about the Korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice. And there it says, V'yikhu lachem ish sela veit avot sela bait. You should take yourself a little sheep, one per family, because Pesach and the Seder should be celebrated first with the family. If, however, there's too many or too much sheep, not enough family, then you get together with the neighbors and you bring in other people. But it's very much in the home. Okay. Rabbi Akiva, who spent 24 years in the Beit Midrash, he left home, 24 years later he came back. During that time, there were only 2 instances in the year where he would tell people, go home. One, right? Erev Pesach and Erev Yom Kippur. Erev Yom Kippur, because you need to have time to eat and you need to have time to give your children food before the fast begins. Erev Pesach, as it says here, because of the children, so that they shouldn't fall asleep. Meaning, when the time comes to start the Seder, make sure you're at home to be able to start it on time. Okay? So when you go to shul, go to shul. And when shul is over, Go home. Don't hang around. You have a Seder to go to. You need to get there on time. I don't know if the shul will be open or not. I'll leave that for whatever newsletter will come out nearer the time. I don't know, is the shul's open yet or not?
Yes, the shul is open and the times have been published, and we always finish in time for people to get home, ready to start the Seder. In other words, we daven a bit lifnei hazman before it gets dark, so that people are ready to go.
Excellent. And on the second night, don't forget to count the Omer. Last night we didn't count at all. Okay. So that's the three pillars, I would say, of my Seder. Okay? The experience of the Seder, the educational component, and the togetherness. And when we keep these three things in mind, I can then build my Seder around it. Okay? That's together. Okay. The absolute golden rule when it comes to the Seder. What is it?
Drink 4 cups of wine.
Add marshmallows.
Drink 4 cups of wine, I'm told. Marshmallows, we'll get to that shortly.
Have a comment.
Keep the
Okay,
kids interested.
you're fair. Thank you. The more interesting the evening, the less people think about food. Okay? The meal is something that we'll get to, but we'll get to it eventually. So growing up in our house, the cutlery was never put on the table. Right? It was set aside. It was ready on the side. Because if people see cutlery, right, the Shani's motioning there was wrapped up in serviettes on the side. Because if people see cutlery on the table, they start thinking that they're going to be fed soon. And that's absolutely not the case. Okay? So don't create an expectation that people are going to eat. Create an expectation that they're there for the togetherness and for the learning and for the experience. And give them a good meal afterwards. Okay? But the more interesting the evening, the less people will think about food.
Sorry to interrupt. It's actually something I still do. There's twice a year that I roll up the cutlery. So it's Sederim and it's also Sukkot time. But that's beside the point. Seder, every year I still roll up cutlery.
So do we, but why do you do it on Sukkot?
Because because of the weather, living in England, Benji, you can't always lay the table and not guarantee it won't rain. So it was all rolled up, ready to go
okay.
if we're able to eat outside. So again, that's something I still do.
There you go. It's part of the experience. You're all welcome for Sukkot in Israel. It's really nice. Every so often it also rains, but not normally. Okay. Guests. Before we actually start the Seder, we have to think about it. Okay? So guests this year and last year is a bit of a problem. But there's no reason why we can't have guests at our Seder. We just need to do it virtually. Okay? Which means we need to think about who is it that we want at our Seder and how can we bring them into the Seder without them physically being there. Okay? I'll give a few examples as we go through the Haggadah of how exactly we can do that. But Ruti can give one example that we did last year, but when we get to the four sons, I'll give you that the chance to describe it. Okay. Prizes, costumes, decor, plays, all things that need to be prepared beforehand. So if you have children or grandchildren who are going to be with you, ask them to come ready with a play that they're going to produce on the evening. What do I mean by decor? Most years, I will take some red crepe paper and put it up and across the door frame, because we're supposed to relive the experience of that very first Seder. And at that very first Seder in Egypt, right, they painted the doorposts with the blood. Now, I don't recommend painting your doorposts with blood, and until God Almighty comes down and tells me to do it, I'm going to stick to crepe paper. But I will do that. And as soon as people walk in, particularly those who don't necessarily know me and have never been to one of my Sedarim, they look at that and they suddenly start thinking, ooh, what's going on here? It's a bit different. I'll use blue crepe paper and create the Red Sea. So I can either hang it down in strips from the door, so that when people walk into the room where the Seder is happening, they have to literally part the sea. And I know that we don't really talk about the parting of the Red Sea at the Seder, and I know it only happened on the 7th day of Pesach and not the 1st, but, you know, give me that one, please. Okay. Again, something that's great for children to do. If they have Lego or Playmobil or anything like that, ask them to create the centerpiece on the table, or you can have it on a side table, wherever is good for you. Have them recreate the Exodus, and then use that as you go through the evening, okay? So that they're helping to set up the room itself. Prizes. This is one of my Afikoman prizes. Right? We'll explain a bit more about the Afikoman when we get there, but I'm a big fan of not giving out massive things. The other thing I'll often give out at the beginning of the Seder, particularly to adults, and particularly to adults who have young children with them at the Seder, is things like this. That's a stress ball, okay? Because I know that everybody who comes to the Seder is stressed. So the first thing I'm going to try and do is lower the stress level. And I'll only give this to the adults. The children are going to get loads of things throughout the evening. The stress ball is for the adults. And there was one year that I had, all my siblings, except for Shani, who wasn't, was in England. And they know that my Seder starts at 7 o'clock in the evening and goes on till the following week. So the one thing I do is demonstratively, I will take off my watch at the beginning of the Seder. I will put it on the side and say, this doesn't concern me. I don't care about the time. However, because I know that some of you do care about the time, and you think that what is going to happen this evening is I'm just going to talk for hours, which is true. Okay? I gave them a foam clock, right, that they could play with, the sort of thing you give to children who are starting to learn how to tell the time. I gave them one of those at the beginning of the Seder and said, if you want to know what the time is, make it up on your own. Okay? Anything that just lowers the stress levels a little. Okay? By the way, the best time to go shopping for all these tchotchkes in Israel is just after Purim, before they put everything away back in the cupboards for the following year. In England, I'm assuming it's somewhere around Halloween, okay, where everything is going cheap. So remember it for next year. Go shopping at Halloween for Pesach. The hat. So I normally come with this one, but you can design your own hat. Have somebody in the family, paint the picture, get it printed, come up with some sort of family slogan. We're actually going to have T-shirts this year that have already been printed, but please, dear family members here, do not tell my wife and children because it's a surprise. They're not going to know about the T-shirts until the Seder itself. Okay? And there'll be a nice message on there. But again, this is something that can be given to the children to design themselves. So yes, it means that they're going to come and they'll sit there with a baseball cap, or they'll sit there with a T-shirt. It's not necessarily your festive best, but it passes the message across really nicely. Cancun, I mentioned, right? So I gave a Pesach workshop at the conference that we had for our emissaries in both North and South America. We had it in Mexico, and I borrowed one of these hats from one of the locals, okay? Which is great for the picture, but it's a seriously heavy hat, not recommended for the whole Seder. Do your homework, and not only do your homework, but for anybody who's actively leading a Seder and you have people coming, doesn't matter how many, get them to do some homework as well. The more prepared you are and they are for the Seder, the easier it'll be on the flow, the easier it'll be to understand what's happening. And I'll give examples as we go through the evening as to ideas that you can give them to do. But preparation here is key. if you have people who may have trouble reading, right? While we want everybody to be involved, if they have problems reading, tell them ahead of time which sections of the Haggadah you want them to read. Okay? It doesn't matter if it's in the Hebrew or the English, but tell them ahead of time. Okay? It just makes things nicer. And of course, don't forget to say thank you. Who do we need to thank?
Hashem.
Okay, who else? It's a good answer, but who else?
The hostess and the host.
Absolutely. Who else?
The guests.
Absolutely. Who else?
The children.
The children. Basically everybody. Thank everybody who's there. Anybody who's done anything and anybody who hasn't done anything. Anybody who helped with the cooking, the cleaning, the getting ready, the shopping, the program. You know, just say thank you at the beginning. Before Kiddush, just say thank you. Okay? It's nice. It works. Okay? When you get to the Red Sea and you sing the whole song, that whole song is essentially a big thank you to God. So let's learn from that and say thank you as well. If you have people at home who are in quarantine, this is something that we had. There was one Shabbat where a Yelet and one of the children were in quarantine over Shabbat. So they were locked in one side of the house and I had the rest of the children on the other side of the house. This is something that could potentially happen, certainly in Israel. I don't know all the ins and outs of how it works in England, but it could happen during Seder. So what do you do? Okay. First of all, see if you can do it right next to one another. So you effectively have two Seder tables, two Seder plates, two sets of everything, but try and have it as close physically as you possibly can while sticking to all the necessary rules and guidelines. Okay? Do it by pantomime. If what you have between you is some sort of plastic sheet that's see-through, do parts of the Seder as a pantomime. Right?
Oh,
I don't know, how does one leave Egypt without making a sound? Okay? I don't know, think about it. Okay? How are you going to explain to people, now we need to lean, and which way do we do so? Okay? So all together on the count of 3. And I know that my screen is twisted. I was actually leaning to the left. Okay? Think about how you can do that. Prepare notes ahead of time with questions, with suggestions, with ideas, with comments, and just slide it under the door. Okay? And that way you have this interaction going on between you. Before Yom Tov, if you can't actually physically see each other, and this is good whether it's in quarantine or with grandparents, grandchildren, family from around the world, have a mock Seder beforehand. Sing all your favorite songs. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi what you can do about eating matzah beforehand. Not my department. Okay? Yeah. Do things beforehand and do it as a Zoom or a Skype or whatever you use. If you can't have your regular visitors or your irregular visitors, the idea of leaving an empty chair at the Seder is something that goes back a good 60, 70 years. The first mention that I found of it was actually from 1965. It was the first time that I saw the idea of leaving a chair there. Okay, and different reasons have been given for it. It was either done because of the refuseniks in Russia who couldn't get out. It was done for soldiers in Tzal who were being captured and held hostage. It was done to mark the 5th child. Right, the 5th child is the one who isn't even there. Okay, for whatever reason that you leave the empty chair, you can still leave an empty chair, but don't leave the place empty. So when you've asked people to send in thoughts and ideas and family history and pictures and various other things that they can send, have that sitting in that place. And then when you get to that stage in the Seder, you go to the place, you open the envelope, and you have that guest as part of your Seder, even though they're not physically there. And again, I'll give some examples shortly. Get the children and the grandchildren involved by sending questions ahead of time to the parents, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the rabbi. Right? What questions? Whatever you want. Anything that fits into the Seder. And it can be from personal experience, right? What's the earliest Seder you can remember? What was the weirdest Seder that you had? What was the longest one? What was the shortest one? You can think of all those sorts of questions, or it can be questions about the Haggadah itself, the story, the text, questions that you want to have explained. And then either call them after Yom Tov and get them to give the answers, or have them send the questions ahead of time. The children send the questions ahead of time, and whoever's replying, they send it back ahead of time. And again, you put it in the place, and when you get to that point in the Seder, just open up the envelope and read it out. Okay? You can do it by video as well. You have a family tune that you want to make sure that everybody knows, send it to them. Okay? You have a special message that you want other people to receive, send it ahead of time. Okay? And obviously play it ahead of time, or play it after Yom Tov. Okay? Great. We're nearly ready for the Seder. Up to now, it's just been an introduction. Thoughts, comments, suggestions? If not, we'll carry on. Okay. Where do you have your Seder? Okay. So when you have a big crowd, right, the easiest place to do it is around a dining room table. Okay. That normally takes up all the space that you have. When you have a smaller crowd, or if you have a bigger house, you don't necessarily have to have it by the table. The table is useful if you want to eat, but you can sit at the table for the meal, and then you can sit in the lounge for other parts of it. So when we talk about leaning, right, so it's much easier to lean on a settee or on an armchair than it is on a dining room chair. Great, so do it. You have bean bags, bring in the bean bags. Okay? Think about where it is that you want to sit. Right, there are questions as to where you can do kiddush and you have to be able to see the table. But again, for all the halachic guidelines on how to do all of these things, please see your local Orthodox rabbi. That's why he's here, right? Thank you, Rabbi Davis. Okay.
Yes. Just unmuting myself to say yes. You should. Several years ago, when Reverend Myers and Lorraine came to us for Seder, it was just the few of us and one or two others, and we indeed conducted most of the Seder in the lounge, as Rabbi Benjy has in comfortable armchairs, and we only came to the table for the meal. It was really nice.
It works very nicely. It just gives a slightly different atmosphere to everything that's going on.
You just have to make sure that you're not the kind that falls asleep when sitting in the armchair. Otherwise, it could be what they call silent night.
I'm not going to ask how that worked with the guests that you mentioned, because, and all that. Okay. Marshmallows. I love marshmallows. Okay? They are the greatest food substance that we eat at the Seder. They might not be the most halachic food that we eat at the Seder, but it is the best food at the Seder. Why? Because I give out marshmallows as if they're, marshmallows. Okay? And I'll hand out marshmallows for any reason imaginable and for several reasons that aren't. So if somebody gives a good answer to a question, if somebody asks a question, if they get up on their chair to sing, if they don't get up on their chair to sing, if they sing, if they have terrible voices and they don't sing, I'll give them something. Okay? Find reasons to give marshmallows. Now, why marshmallows? Well, first of all, the Rambam, Maimonides, talks about giving out nuts and dried fruits and other such things. I don't remember the exact language, but certainly nuts was there, in order to keep the children involved and entertained. Okay? That's great, except that half the world is allergic to nuts. Okay? The other advantage of marshmallows, they're full of sugar. And what I want on Seder night is for the children to be full of sugar, because it means they'll be awake. Okay? The other really good reason for marshmallows is that if you happen to do something that you are not allowed to do at the table the rest of the year, and that's to throw things across the table, if you throw a marshmallow and it accidentally hits somebody in the face, it doesn't hurt. Okay? If you do it with something slightly harder, it will, or it will knock over the glass of wine or cause all sorts of untold damage. Marshmallows, they're great. Okay? When you have Pesach, not on Shabbat, okay? The other thing you can do, certainly with adults, I'm not sure I'd recommend it with children, is have a candle on the table, and you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. So spear the marshmallow and have it over an open flame. It's amazing. It's great. Do it. Okay? When can you eat the marshmallows and when can't you eat the marshmallows? Again, Rabbi Davis. Okay? Marshmallows. They're amazing. Get things ready for the Seder. The word Seder means order. That is, explain to people ahead of time what you're going to be doing and where you are over the course of the evening. Okay? So you can make up posters. And I have files of all this stuff. Anybody who wants anything, make a list, send me a note. I will gladly send you all of these things afterwards. Right? Cut out the 15 posters. You give them to a child or an adult, and every time you move across to the next stage, they hold it up. Right? Think of a boxing ring where they walk around in between the rounds and hold up the number for the following round. Same idea, just slightly more Jewish. Okay? If you really want to get excited, what you can do is string up a piece of string in the room where you're in and have a peg or 15 pegs. And every time you get to the next stage, somebody holds it up and then you string it up. Okay? It just adds to the atmosphere in the room. You can make it as a clock. So this is something you can cut out, and you put one of those funny pins in the middle that helps you move the dial around. You have that up on the wall and just move the dial around so that you know which stage you're at. Okay? This is a fun one. Okay? The Seder plate is fantastic. When we talk about Purim, Purim is the festival of V'nahafochu, of opposites. That's what we're always told, to the extent it actually says it in the Megillah. Right? V'nahafochu asher yishlitzu haYehudim hema b'sonihem. The whole thing was turned upside down, and the Jewish people overcame their enemies. The ultimate festival of V'nahafochu, of opposites, is Pesach. I'll ask you a question. When you take a bite out of the matzah, what are you thinking about? What does the matzah represent? Huh?
Lechem oni.
Lechem ani, right? The bread of affliction. What is the reason you're drawing all over my screen?
Sorry, I don't know how hard it is or how soft it is, but it's good quality this year.
Okay, so you're thinking about the actual bread stuff itself. Bread of affliction, what's the other reason we have matzah? What does it represent?
Humility?
No. Why do we have unleavened bread?
Chipazon.
Chipazon, right? The Jewish people left Egypt in haste and there wasn't time for the bread to rise. So on the one hand, the matzah is the bread of affliction. That's what they had in Egypt because they were slaves and they couldn't afford yeast. And on the other hand, they left Egypt so quickly the bread didn't have time to rise. So when you take a bite out of the matzah, you're supposed to be thinking about both these things. They're opposites, but you have them both. When we dip the karpas in salt water, what does the karpas represent? Right, the green vegetable.
just so the children should know.
right? Represents the spring, right? It's an hors d'oeuvre. It's something that royalty and the upper echelons in early Greek society would eat, right? But you dip it in salt water. Salt water represents what?
The
The tears. The tears of what?
Israelites.
Really? The Israelites when?
Slavery.
So when they were slaves, and because they were so upset, they would cry. And therefore we take something that is green, that represents spring, that represents, the world coming, and growing and being really happy, and dip it in the salt water that represents the tears of slavery. Okay? It's the festival of opposites. Now,
I might suggest that it also represents the two things which, as you say, are opposites. When we came to Egypt, it was wonderful.
Yafa?
It was a life of luxury, and then it turned bitter.
Okay, thank you. So what I would do is you have here the Seder plate, and you have the various things that are on the Seder plate and a couple of things around it. So the matzah, we said already, represents two opposites, right? The salt water could represent two opposites. It could be the tears of slavery. It could also be the tears of joy when they left. Okay? I cut this up into separate cards, 2 sets of it. I give it to 2 people who really like to argue, ideally with each other. And I ask them to rearrange the cards chronologically. As in, they have to think about what do each of these things represent, and therefore, where do they appear in the story? So if we're going to say that the salt water represents the tears of slavery, it's going to come fairly early in the story. If it represents the tears of joy of the Exodus, it's going to come fairly late. Okay? And we do the same for all of them. And then you give them 2 envelopes, in the envelopes, a set of cards each, and ask them to set it up. And then at some point during the Seder, you say, what have you got and why? And get them to explain why they chose what they chose, and they argue with each other. And this is something that you can send it ahead of time and ask them to think about it. It doesn't have to be given out there and then. And it can be sent to family and friends who aren't going to be with you at the Seder, and get them to write it out. And then the other people at the Seder can ask questions. Okay? And it doesn't matter what the reason given is, I will always argue the other side. Okay? So you can tell me that the kalpas represents greenery, and I'll tell you why it doesn't. Okay? And I'll do that, 1, because it's fun. 2, it makes people think. 3, I'm just really annoying. And most people who know me here will agree with that. I would hazard a guess, particularly Rabbi Davis. Okay. We're finally starting the Seder. Okay, I'm going to start running because I'm cognizant of the time, mainly because here it's 11 o'clock at night. Okay. Kiddush. Kiddush is the opposite of Havdalah, right? So Havdalah, that separates the holy from the mundane. With Kiddush, we do the same thing. Talk about it. What can we do about making a difference in time? How do we make that difference? The family custom that we have is that one person is designated the Sarah Mashkim, right? The official pourer for the family. Okay? So the tradition is that we don't pour for ourselves because we want to behave like royalty, and therefore somebody else pours for us. And growing up, that was always my job. And it was always better to be the chief pourer than it was to be not the Sarah Mashkim, but the Sarah Alfim, right? So from the story of Joseph, he had these 2 positions. The Sarah Mashkim, the chief pourer, was the one who lived. The Sarah Alfim, the chief baker, he ended up dangling from a tree. So it's always good to volunteer to be the pourer. Urchatz, washing hands. Washing hands, obviously, we've all seen the slogans everywhere. Make sure you wash your hands. So who washes hands? Are you going to change that tradition? If you only have one person washing their hands and they're the ones doing the dipping, are you going to change that this year? If so, why? Talk about it, discuss it. Where do you do the washing? Do you have somebody bring the water to the table, or do you get up and move away? Can you wash your hands for karpas with alcohol? No, Rabbi? You don't have to answer now. It might be good for a shiur at some point.
A shiur? I don't think so. I think in these days, make sure you've used some kind of
Liquid soap.
liquid soap, which is the best thing actually, even today with COVID. Liquid soap is the best thing. Make sure you do that before the Seder, and then you wash your hands with a cup as usual.
Oh, there you go.
That's the beginning and the end of the shiur.
Thank you very much. Okay. I know COVID is spelled with a C, but hey, alliteration. Okay. In my family, I do the dipping. Right? And I pass it around for everybody else, which means I'm the only one who washes my hands. Is that something that we actually want to do this year as well? Or if we're going to have visitors who aren't immediate family, do I want to change my personal custom because of COVID? Okay. And if so, who dips, who hands out, who washes? If we're going to re-dip, do you want to have a personal salt water rather than just one or two central bowls? Okay. And cutlery. So normally we dip the karpas with our hands. Well, again, is this something that we want to do at the moment, or do we actually want to use a fork? Okay. All these things can be thought about and you can decide. Okay. Getting on to the afikoman. This is a personal bugbear. Okay. The idea of taking something that is incredibly crummy, hiding it somewhere, having my children run off, making an even bigger mess in order to find it, and then coming back and effectively restarting a barter system just to be able to hand me back half a piece of matzah, it doesn't sit well with me. Right? And I know growing up, that's what we did. And Abba, I'm terribly sorry, but I don't like doing it myself. Okay, so what do I do instead? Well, you can still do the original, where the leader of the Seder hides it, and everybody else has to go off and look for it. You can do it the other way around. You can actually hand it over to the children, get them to hide it, and you have to go looking for it. Okay, depends whether or not you ever want to find it. Okay, hide pictures. Okay, you can buy cardboard cutouts, or you can print them of matzah, hide those. The advantage of that is you can do it ahead of time. And you don't just have to hide one, you can hide several. You can cut it up into a jigsaw and have them find the different pieces. And only when the jigsaw comes together, do they then get the prize. By the way, for prizes, so I've shown you, I'll give out little cups like that. I'll give out little toys and games. There was one year where I hid different pieces of the cardboard matzah cutout, and each one had a number on the back, and the number represented a prize, which means ahead of time I knew what I was giving them. There were 6 pieces of card hidden. The first 4 gave them a little toy game something. Number 5 was a kiss from your mother. For some reason, nobody went to find number 6. I don't know why, okay, but they didn't. Okay. My personal favorite is this. Okay. It's a box. It comes with a lock. In here, I put my matzah, or rather, I put it in here. This is another box with another lock. And then I give them a task. And if they complete the task, well, depending on the type of lock, if it's a key, then I'll give them the key. And if it's not a key and it's a number lock, they have to figure out what the challenge was. And the answer to the challenge is the code. And when they solve it, they open it and they have the afikoman. Okay? And my children know that the afikoman stays with me. They can go off and do something else. Okay? It's an escape room. So create your own escape room. Again, I have different escape rooms that I've done over the years. I can gladly send people what I have. I would say that that's the prize this year for finding the Afikoman. But seeing as Rabbi Davis has already told us to use liquid soap, find a different price. Okay. We're getting into Magid. Okay. The other thing that I come to my Seder with is this, right? What's known in Yiddish as a pekalach. Okay. So I start off my Seder wearing my kittel with a hat and my pekalach. And I'll hold it here for quite a while. And every year I have something different in the bag. Okay, so some years it'll be, no, Shani, what's going to be in there? What's in there now?
I don't know. What's in there?
Marshmallows.
Oh, marshmallows. It didn't
This
sound
is where
like
you store the
marshmallows.
marshmallows. Come on.
That sounds like very hard marshmallows you're throwing at people across the table there,
No,
but
it's just there's the marshmallows. Okay, hang on for
mine
that.
are in the cupboard. Yeah, mine are in the
Okay,
cupboard.
so you can do that. You can hide in the quizzes. You can hide in there this year, but again, please don't tell my family. This year, the t-shirts are going to be in there. You can, there were some years that I really went all out and I put the matzah in there. Because after all, that's what they carried out with them, right? They didn't carry marshmallows. But you come ready to reenact. And there are different communities, mainly the Saudi communities, who at this point in time actually get up and walk around, right? We left Egypt in a rush. So great. Go for a walk. Or better still, if you have the energy for it, which means I generally don't do this, run around the table, right? So that when you get asked the question, what's for supper? And the standard answer was a walk around the table. Great. Here's your walk around the table. That was the answer growing up that I always got when I asked what's for supper. Okay. Halach ma'anya, right? At the end of it, we say, anybody who wants, come and eat. Anybody who needs to share in the Pesach sacrifice, come and join us. Great. So if you're inviting them, create the invitation. Or if you're really adventurous, and this is something I can do on the kibbutz, I'm not sure I'd recommend it so much for walking around Shigwell. I came with a message on the stick, right? Anybody who's hungry, come and eat. Anybody who needs to share in the Pesach sacrifice, come and join the Pesach sacrifice. And I went to shul earlier in the afternoon on Erev Pesach. I hid this behind my place. Fortunately, I sit up against a wall. And then at the end of shul, I invited my son to do this, but he point blank refused. So I did it. I picked this up and I walked out of shul holding this up in the air, telling people, no, if you need somewhere for the Seder, come and join me. This is what the message means, right? It's also a way to get around the question of why on earth are we inviting people to the Seder after we've already made kiddush and eaten hors d'oeuvre? It's a really good question, right? But create some other message. Manishtana. Do it in as many languages as you can. Right? And this is something that can definitely be recorded ahead of time and sent. And you can challenge people to practice at home and then come to the Seder knowing how to sing Manishtana in Yiddish, in Hungarian, in Arabic, whatever you decide. Okay? What else can you stand on? Again, this is something that we do different on Seder night. Normally, we don't stand on the dining room chairs. Seder night, we encourage our children to stand on the dining room chairs to sing Manishtana. Now, if you happen to be with just adults, I'm not sure I would have them standing on the dining room chairs, unless you want your dining room chairs to be on the dining room floor, flat pack. Okay. So what else can you stand on? Or if you do have children, certainly younger ones, how about taking them on your shoulders and getting them to do Manishtana that way? Okay. And if they do stand on the chairs, my Abba will tell you that the next best thing you can do is then ask them, how do you get down from a chair? And this is a question that can take a good half hour to answer, and he can explain the joke to you later. Thank you. I don't know, do we mute him or not?
No.
Yes, quite. Hey, the question, the ultimate discussion that you can have is, how is this year different from all other years? Right? Why is this night different? And this is a good way to get into where were we last year? Where are we this year? What have we learned? How does this impact personal slavery and personal exodus? Right? That's the idea of the Seder, is to relive the experience. So you can't necessarily do it from Egypt, but you can definitely do it as your own personal exodus.
Yak Nahas is the answer to your question.
Sorry again, I didn't hear.
Yak Nahas.
Yafe.
Yeah.
Go on.
So that's
I
a
can drink.
combination of the fact that first Seder is Motzei Shabbat, which is very, very unusual. And the Kiddush and Havdalah have a unique combination for that night. And that's enough to make it different from most other years. But that combined with all the other things that Rav Benjy has said makes it indeed a very unique one. And it's in March as well. And the clocks are changing that night. Anything else?
Yeah, I heard about that one. Good luck with that.
We've decided, or I've decided, no one's objected, we put all the service times and Seder times, everything GMT, 8 o'clock after.
Right. Yep.
And then we've got the fiction of starting Seder an hour earlier.
Right. Very good idea. By the way, those people who have the whiskey, this is a good time to drink it. You certainly can't have it on Seder night. And this is my way to explain to Ayelet that, good man, Kevin. This is a good way to explain to Ayelet that I'm helping with the Pesach cleaning. I'm cleaning out the whiskey.
Okay.
Chaim.
Sounds about right.
Okay. Avadim Hayinu. Play games with your children. Okay. So the answer to Manishtana, why is this night different and what are we learning, is we were slaves and now we're free. Great. So you want to explain to them what slavery means. Slavery means you follow instructions and you do not do anything other than follow those instructions. So the best game to play in following instructions is Simon Says, or in this case, Pharaoh says. So play the game. Okay? The other great thing you can do is retell the story of the Exodus. This is good for slightly older children, so I'd say primary school age. Retell the story, but make mistakes on purpose and wait for them to correct you. They will love it. Right? So many, many years ago in a land far away, Achashverosh made us slaves. And you wait for them to say, it wasn't Achashverosh, it was Pharaoh. Okay? And just retell the story that way. Okay? Yeah. Too many rabbis spoiled the drasha. Okay. Who else would you like to have at the Seder? Okay? Which other 4 people would you like to be quarantined with? Okay? There were 5 rabbis there. Just those 5 rabbis. We know that the students weren't there because the students had to come in later and say, rabbis, you know, it's time for shul. Okay? So they were effectively quarantined that night just among themselves. Okay? So talk about it. Where would you like to go once you're free? Okay? And you can reenact that scene. Because what the Haggadah doesn't tell us is what they spoke about. Right? They spoke about the story of the Exodus, but what exactly did they say? Okay? So reenact that story. If you want to make it as a fun story, go ahead, make it as a fun story. Okay? Right. We're going to run through a few things. The 4 sons. There are loads of pictures on the internet you can find, and if anybody has this, or you can get hold of it, it's a brilliant, brilliant Haggadah. Okay? Okay? And it has pictures at the back, I don't know if you can see that, of different depictions of the 4 sons. Okay? And this is something you can pass around and discuss. Right? If we had time, I would ask you to explain which book here represents which one of the 4 sons. Okay? So does the burning fire resemble the bright spark that is the wise son, or is it the wicked son who's just burning everything? Okay? This is a picture that I asked one of my nieces to paint to depict her understanding of the 4 sons. This is a tehillah for anybody who knows. Okay? And don't limit people. Tell them you want the 4 sons. Great. So I asked somebody to do this and he came back with 5. Wonderful. Amazing. Okay? If you have people who need to get up and move, great. Give them a hat, give them a mask, and get them to jump like frogs. Okay? If you can get the adults to do this, it's even better, because it's just much funnier. Okay? An activity for V'hisha Anda, right? This is another weird one. We cover the matzah, we raise our glasses in a toast, but we do something that we don't do whenever we do a different toast. Now, whenever we toast, at weddings or other events, after you do that, you then take a drink. Here we don't. Right? I hand out, again, I separate my Seder into 2 teams, and I hand out 2 sets of cards, 1 to each team. Within those cards, there's 1 set of cards with dates and 1 set of cards with events from Jewish history. And I ask them to arrange the things so that the event matches the date, and then to arrange it chronologically. And the first team to get the answer right shouts out Afikomen or Seder or Dayen or whatever it is you want. Okay? And only after that do we sing V'hisha Anda. Because V'hisha Anda, when we say thanks to God for saving us, but we need to understand why we're doing it. So you need to understand Jewish history to know that in every generation they rose up against us. Right? And that's one way of doing it. Okay? We're going to really fly through it. Okay, what are the modern 10-day plagues? You can give this out. However, COVID is not allowed to be on that list. That's too easy. It's obviously on the list, but it's too easy. So ask them to come up with a different 10 plagues, right? Zoom for school children. Is that a plague or not? Well, it's an interesting discussion. The most misunderstood bit of the Seder, maths. So you get towards the end of the Seder after the 10 plagues, and suddenly you see that there aren't just 10 plagues, there are 10 in Egypt and 50 at the sea, or 40 in Egypt and 200 at the sea, or 50 in Egypt and 250 at the sea, and it's not quite clear how all this works, or what's the point? What does it matter whether they had 10 plagues or 250 plagues? So one is a discussion, and one, for those people who prefer to see things visually, show it to them visually. Again, this is something I created. I'm happy to send it, but you can ask somebody else to do it themselves, right? So each plague is really 1 finger, therefore it's multiplied by 5, which gives you the hand, multiplied by the words in the verse, and therefore everything is color-coded, but just make life easier. Dayenu. Dayenu is another song of thanks, but instead of saying Toda at the end of the line, we say Dayenu. Okay, so what do we have to be thankful for this year? And this is something that you can definitely give out as homework ahead of time and ask people to write their own Dayenu. And they can do the 15 stages that we have in our Dayenu, they can do 10, they can do 5, they can do 50, okay, whatever feels good. If they can get it to also fit into the music of the song, even better, okay? But they can definitely do that. And then when you get to Dayenu, actually physically get up and dance, because by that point, unless you've been jumping around like a frog, you've been sat down for a good 2 hours, and now's the time to actually move. Okay? I was always brought up and told it's rude to point. Okay? However, when you get to Pesach Matzah Maro, you actively point, nearly, except for the Pesach, right? The Pesach, which is the Paschal sacrifice, we don't have. We only have a representation of it on our Seder plate. So we don't actively point at it. And if you look at the language of the Haggadah, by matzah and maror, it says matzah zeh, maror zeh, like this matzah and this maror. But by Pesach, it says Pesach shayu avotenu ochlim. It doesn't have the word zeh, this, because it's not really there. So if it's not really there, how do we talk about it? How do we talk about things that you can't see? And that can very easily go into a discussion about germs. Okay? Ask people to tell their own story. Just before you get to the Hallel, Okay? Get them to talk about their own story. What are you thankful for? What are you about to raise your glass and toast God for? So yeah, we talk about the Exodus, however many hundreds and thousands of years ago, but what are we thankful for now? That's the end of Magid. Okay? And I know I ran through it, but again, I'll gladly send all this. Okay? Matzah. How much do you have to eat? Which direction do you have to be sitting in order to do it? How much time do you have to eat it? And are you allowed to talk while eating it? And if you are allowed to talk, what are you allowed to talk about? Okay? These are questions that when you get to that point in the Seder, nobody quite fully understands, and all you're doing is munching. So you're allowed to talk about the mitzvah even after you've washed your hands. So I always, after washing hands, before saying the bracha, explain what's happening, because you're allowed to. And on Seder night, which is different, I'm going to do it different from what I would do on a normal Shabbat. If Rabbi Davis says that's not a good idea, he will tell you now. Man, he's opening his microphone.
It's not something that we do.
I didn't say it's something that we do. The question was it a good idea?
I was trying to be diplomatic. But it's very important to explain. I just explained before washing hands. What I might sometimes even do is everyone's come out for washing hands and I haven't yet.
No, that's sadistic.
That's just nasty.
And I try not to take any longer than 30 minutes, but yeah, fine.
Hey, each rabbi has their own mode of annoying people. Mine is to annoy other rabbis. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Maro. Okay. Again, we've just had the matzah, which is the bread of freedom, and now we eat something that reminds us of the slavery. We're going backwards in time. How does that work? Okay. Sandwich. Okay. When else do we remember the Beit HaMikdash? Zecher leMikdash keHillel. Those are the words, right? We remember that this is what Hillel did at the time of the temple. Okay. So when else do we remember it? Why do we need to remember it? Why is it? What's the point? What's going on? Miriam, you still with us? Okay.
Yep.
We're going to do this one, and then I'll get on to a Chad Gadya. And we'll finish with that.
Okay, I'm listening.
Okay. What does BYOCB stand for? We know what BYOB stands for.
Bring your own bread.
Well, bring your own bottle.
Bottle,
This is Pesach. This is why you speak to your local Orthodox rabbi as opposed to the one from South London.
What's that? Bring your own chavaset.
Yeah, fair. Bring your own chavaset bar. Miriam, would you like to explain the chavaset bar?
Yay! Okay, chavaset bar. 1 second.
And I'm asking Miriam because she did this with us.
Hi.
Great.
Chavaset bar is basically an idea where you find every single thing that you could possibly cut up small and mix together to make some kind of charoset looking spread, and put it all out in a bar, in a bar style, and then give each person a cup at the beginning of the Seder and encourage them to go and make their own charoset. The kids love it, and adults also love it because they get to make something that they really enjoy, like apple and ginger and wine and, oh goodness, Benji, what else did we put in there?
There were chocolate chips somewhere.
There are, for the smaller people, there were chocolate chips and chocolate
I mean, for the small
syrup
people. That's what I took.
and anything, and marshmallows, of course. And it's just a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. I've done it so far the last 5 years, and every Seder I've been to, and every family who's been there has adopted it and taken it on. Enjoy. As opposed to just.
Thank you. Rabbi Davis, you want to say something there? Or are you just still unmuted? Okay. So we'll finish off with this. You get to the end of the Seder, everybody is falling asleep for those people who aren't already asleep. Now you need to wake them up so that you can finish on a high. So the last two songs that we sing, Echad Mi Yodea, who knows one, and Chad Gadya. So Echad Mi Yodea, the way we do it in our house is that we sing one verse in Hebrew, one verse in English. Okay? And the idea is not to get confused as to which verse you're on. The fact that they are two completely different tunes is also quite funny. You can also get people to do it in other languages, or something that I enjoy challenging particularly children to do is to sing the last verse, right? Who knows 13, but do it in one breath. And if they do it in one breath, what do they get?
Marshmallow.
No, they get a bar of chocolate. Oh, they had loads of marshmallows. Now they get a complete, okay? But they only get the bar of chocolate on the proviso that they share it with their siblings. And if they don't have siblings, they have to share it with me. Okay? Right? That's loads of fun, and it's something you can do at lunch the following day as well, because the likelihood is nobody's managed to do it, but they definitely want to try, and they definitely want that bar of chocolate. Chad Gadya. This is the most complicated part of the evening. If you do it this way, that you ask different people to take on the noises produced by the characters within Chad Gadya, the problem is you're not going to reach the end, because people are just going to be laughing too hard. Okay? So the most important part is beyond handing out masks. Okay? So here, stuff. Masks for the water, for the cat, the goat, right? And you can ask people to create this ahead of time, and everybody has to wear a mask, even people like me who don't like it. And nowadays, when everybody's wearing masks anyhow, this is just a slightly different one. And they have to do the noises. But what you really need is one person who can just keep singing. Because if you're not going to have that one person who can keep singing, you're not going to get to the end of the evening. You're going to be stuck somewhere around the cat, the dog, and you know, you have to go back the following night and do it all again, and you'll still be there from the previous night.
Well, growing up, Benjy, I remember it was you singing and Abba doing all the noises, and the rest of us in just completely lost the plot at whatever time of the morning.
I did consider asking Abba to give us a rendition, but we really don't have time for that.
I literally forgot until this
Wow.
minute that I have to do two.
Chad Gadya now has a plane. What was that noise?
Stuart, I thought you were
Okay.
muted.
Yeah, he did that without the mute. That was just directly from him. Adkan, Dayeno, there is a lot more to say, more ideas. I'm happy to continue the discussion with anybody and everybody. If you want the materials, if you want the PowerPoint, I will gladly send that to Rabbi Davis Deshani. If you want it, thoughts, questions, ideas of yours. No?
I really like the charoset bar thing. I think it's very nice to let people be a bit creative instead of having it all presented on a platter. So I'm going to try the charoset bar this year.
Definitely talk to Miriam for ideas.
Okay.
Her department.
I could add what happened last year when we were trying to find.
You're right, I skipped it.
Yeah, it's okay to be involved. I was going to be in as well because we weren't. So what Benjy was really good at is finding people's specific interests. So I'm Sabta Balonim, and the grandma brings along the balloons. So we said, make the four sons in balloons. So I did this, each balloon on a stick, and gave it a face. And the point was, of course, for the first time ever, we had no visitors, but we had the balloons. So the balloons sat on the chairs at the table with us. So we had our balloons, we had our children there. And I took photographs of the balloons as well before Pesach and sent them to the family. So they had grandma and grandpa there, as it were. So the main point of this is get your guests to do something which you know they're passionate about. If it's balloons or marshmallows, whatever it is, invite them to do their marshmallow sons or balloon sons, whatever. And that's where Benjy involves them. Nachon?
Right, and we had those pictures at our Seder, and when we got to the four sons, we took them out. The children didn't know about this ahead of time, so it's another nice surprise for them. And we showed the pictures and discussed, why Safta Ruti chose that particular face for each of the sons. And it was a very nice discussion, a way to bring family in even if they're not there.
And on YouTube.
Rabbi Davis, I'll give you the final word. Doesn't happen often.
So I was reminded that one of the other things that you used to do when before you left to go to Israel was the Seder class that you took, and where all the young people are there now. And no doubt they were stimulated by Benjy, your different way of doing things. And that's what you've done tonight again. You've taken us on a different kind of journey, and we thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, you've had a raft of ideas, which is very difficult, very different rather. Some of them are difficult. Well, I found them difficult. Raft of ideas this evening of how to do things a little bit differently. And I commend these ideas to you. And the idea is to stimulate ourselves. It should never be that the Seder is the same old. It's for that reason that some people actually buy a new Haggadah every year with a different commentary, different way of looking at things, always to stimulate. And I must remember the marshmallows. It's not our custom, but sounds such a great idea. So, yeah. And we look forward to the day that we can all be together with our families. And I look forward when I put marshmallows to the grandchildren, Bezrat Hashem.
Amen.
Amen.
Applause to Benjy.
Thank you very, very much. Normally people say